Section 2.2, we are going to look at the time zone map in this video. So here is a picture of the entire globe, and in this picture it shows us a map of time zones. And what I want to point out about a few things in this picture are that you can see here that the different portions of the country are colored. So for example, this has the color of yellow, kind of up at the top and then down at the bottom, and anything in here that's in yellow matches up. So like this is way over off to the side, that is actually still part of this time zone. So here, part of Russia, even though it looks like it's all the way under this header, it's because it's yellow, it's still in this actual time zone here. And you can see here that some of them are shaded. That means that parts of India share this time zone and parts of India share this time zone. You can see here that China is quite a bit in this green time zone, but we don't really see much green up top. We only see yellow. So here's the time zone portion that it belongs to. So everything is color coded as to what it belongs in based off of its time zone. On this map, it's actually a little bit difficult to see, but you can somewhat see it better in your book. You'll see here that this number actually says 0 on it. And then on this side, we have +1, +2, +3. And then if we look down to this side, we have -1, -2, -3. The 0 represents noon on this time zone map. So this is actually down the very middle of the globe. This would be the line that we would say is the prime meridian. And so everything on this side of the map is a negative, and then everything on this side of the map is a positive. So if I'm basing all of my times off of this time zone, this is 1 hour before, this is 1 hour after that. And we actually call these, the abbreviation that they use for this is the UTC. And what that actually stands for is Universal Time Coordinated. You would see probably online it says Coordinated Universal Time, but technically it would be Universal Time Coordinated. So if we looked at the entire map and we wanted to compare one time zone to another, we would base it off of 0 right here if we wanted to say plus or minus based off of this 0. And that would use the abbreviation UTC. In addition, we also have something called the International Date Line. The International Date Line is actually this big black line that's over here on the map. And this is pretty much between, we have Alaska over here, and then at the very top over here we have a part of Russia. So basically the International Date Line is through the Pacific Ocean, and it goes down, and you can see here that it says this is +12, which means that it's the farthest away from this 0, and it goes straight down the middle of this time zone here. The International Date Line, if you were to cross it, like let's say I'm in the United States over here in Alaska and I kept going west, eventually I would come into Russia over on this side, and when I came into Russia, it would be the next day. So as you're looking at times, if you're traveling from the United States and you go this way, you're going back in time. But if you're traveling in the United States and you're going west and eventually you cross that International Date Line, that means you are in the next date. So something to keep in mind when you're considering these time zones. And we're actually going to be using these different time zones to calculate out what time you would arrive places. So it's very helpful to know if you're traveling what time zone you're going to be going into. So for example, I'll show you a map of just the United States. So on this map, here's a picture of the United States. And we have 4 main time zones. We have a little bit more than that, but it's 4 main time zones. And so here you can see the 4 main time zones of the connected United States. So we have Eastern Time, Central, Mountain, Pacific. And then Alaska is actually a different time zone, and so is Hawaii. Hawaii is 1 out from that. But for example, if I live in the Eastern time zone and I want to go to Mountain time zone, I am going to be changing time 2 different times. I'm going to gain 2 hours sometimes is what they say, because if you travel across this line, it goes back 1 hour, and you travel again, you gain another hour. It goes back 1 hour. So we went on a trip recently, and basically we started on the Eastern time zone, and we went into the Central as part of our travels. We landed ourselves mainly in New Mexico and Arizona, but we ended up going to see the Pacific Ocean, and so we actually crossed all the time zones of the connected United States on that one trip. And then when we made our way back home, we just kept losing hours, it felt like. So we started early, and then by the time we got home, we'd lose an hour when we'd get to the Central time zone and lose another hour when we got back to Eastern time zone. So this can be very helpful when you're thinking about your traveling. And you'll see down here, Alaska's even one over, and then Hawaii is actually one over. So if we were to look, if you were to look at the map, you could see, you know, that those are even farther over. So let's go on ahead and do a few practice problems, and we can see kind of how these interact with each other. So here's some sample problems we're going to go through. So the first one is missionaries to Africa are flying east from New York City to Cairo, Egypt, and the flight takes off at 11:15. It says a direct flight takes 10 hours and 30 minutes. What time will they arrive? And then the second question says, if they have a layover in Qatar, the flight will take 17 hours and 20 minutes. What time will they arrive then? And it says here to calculate for standard time and for daylight savings time. So the first thing that's really helpful to us is to know what time zones we're actually in. And this is where having that understanding the UTC is actually really helpful. And that's because the UTC will tell you, you know, where you're at in comparison to another country. So for example, we have New York City over here, and up top it's the Eastern Standard Time Zone, and it says it's -5. So that means it is 5 hours past that UTC line. And then we have Cairo, Egypt, and it's actually Eastern European time, and it says +2. So the line actually is somewhere over in here, and so it's 2 hours ahead of that time. So in solving these problems, I can't say there's like a necessary formula or a one case fits all, but there's a lot of ways to think about these. So as I was thinking about these problems, I kind of thought, you know what, for this type of problem, the way that I would start is I would start with my start time. So this is kind of my start. All right, and I left at 11:15. Now, one thing to mention that you may know with time already is that hours go with hours and minutes go with minutes. And when we do regular math, a lot of times we think of, you know, you can just, if there's an extra over here or an extra over here, we just take one off. Well, these are in units of 60 minutes. So anytime I want to convert 1 hour into 60 minutes, I can't just add another 10, I'm actually adding 60 minutes to this whole number. So it kind of changes everything. So keep that in mind as we're thinking about these units. So our units are in hours and minutes. The next thing I like to do when I think about this is I'm going to add on how long it takes to fly. So I'm going to say, how long is my flight? All right, well, for part A, it says my flight is 10 hours and 30 minutes. So at this point, I'm just going to add 10 hours and 30 minutes onto that start time. And when I do, it gives me 21 hours and 45 minutes. Now, I know that this 21 is more than 12, but at this point, I'm going to go on ahead and leave my time in military time, and I'm actually not going to change it until the very end, because really what I want to see is which day do I end up in. If this number were more than 24, that would mean I've gone into the next day, but it's still less than 24, so we're just going to go on ahead and leave it. The next item I want to look at is I want to say to myself, okay, so I'm just going to do standard time first. So this is standard time here, and this is only in standard time. So this doesn't change. Cairo, Egypt doesn't change. They don't have daylight savings time necessarily. I don't know if they do or not, but in this problem, we're not going to change it. But in the United States, we do have daylight savings time. So we will be adjusting for that eventually. But when I look at this, I think of a timeline, and I think to myself, okay, so this is kind of my map. Here's my line, this UTC line. I'll put UTC on here. And this is +2, and then this is -5. And my goal is actually to get from here, I want to get from here all the way over to here, and then I'm going to go from here all the way over to here. Put that line back. So I've kind of done 2 jumps. And when I did that, I've gone back in time by 7 hours because I'm going back 5 and now I'm going back 2 more. So now I'm going to adjust for the time difference. So here, I'm going to adjust for the time difference. So because I'm going back in time by 7 hours, I'm going to go on ahead and take 7 hours off of this. And when I do, that gives me 14 hours and 45 minutes. Now, if we were in military time, we would be done. But we do not typically use military time. We use AM and PM. So up here, this is AM. And down here, if this were military time, then I could leave it. But I want to put this in PM. So I am going to adjust to put this now in the regular time that we use, which is AM, PM. So I'm going to take off 12 hours. And when I do, that puts me at 2:45 p.m. All right, so that would be for standard time. Let's say, though, that I want to say that this, instead of this being standard time, this was daylight savings time. So if this is daylight savings time, as you can see, I've got Eastern Daylight Time here as a -4. Well, this would then become a -4. This is still a +2. This doesn't matter. It's just that this became a -4. So now it takes me 4 to get to this UTC line and 2 more. So the time difference is no longer 7 hours. Now it's 6 hours. So that's going to change this whole problem. This ends up becoming 15, and then this becomes 3:45. So if I had daylight savings time, it's going to affect the time that I get to Cairo, Egypt there. It all depends on what time I start, what the time difference is, and how it's going to end up. Now, the flight was still the same amount. That didn't change. It was just my start time was adjusted. Another way to think about this is, let's say it's Eastern Daylight Time. Well, I could have very well said, well, if it was Eastern Standard Time, this would then be 12:15. I would have still had a difference of 7. That still would have put me at 15, and that still would have put me at 3:45. It doesn't really matter. I can adjust my time difference, or I could have adjusted my start time. Both would have been fine. Now, Part B says, let's say they have a layover in Qatar, and the flight is now going to take 17 hours and 20 minutes. What time will they arrive then? Well, this is done very much the same way. I'm still going to start at 11:15. I'm still going to add on the time it takes for my flight, which is going to be this 17:20. When I do that, and I add these together, this gives me 28:35. Now, with my 28:35, I'm still going to do the same thing I did over here. My time difference is still a 7. That doesn't change. So I'm still going to adjust it for the time difference. Even though I'm over 24, I'm not going to worry about it at this point. I just need to know, what would this time difference be? So I'm going to take 7 off of here. And when I take 7 off of here, this is going to then put me at 21:35. And at this point, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, well, that's more than 24. I'm sorry, that's more than 12. I'm now in military time. I'm going to adjust it for military time. And when I do, that puts me at 9:35. Now, I can also adjust this the same way I did for Central Time. This would become a 6. This would then become a 22. This would become 10:35. There's another way that I could have also calculated this out if I didn't want to go through the same calculation. Another thing I'm big on is being able to check my numbers. So one thing I also thought of is I thought, well, did I have to go through all those calculations? No, I really didn't have to go through all those calculations. What I really could have done is I could have started up here and said, okay, what's the difference between these 2 flights? So this one takes 7:20, this one takes 10:30. Let's say I want to find the difference of the 2. Well, right now I can't take 20 minutes and subtract it off of 30 because I don't have enough. So I can take 1 hour out of here. I can change this to 16 hours, and I can add 60 minutes to this because I had mentioned early on that you can't just add 1. Like this doesn't, the 2 doesn't become a 12. Because these are in the units of minutes, every hour has 60 minutes in it. So I can say 20 plus 60 gives me 80 minutes. So I've got my 1680 now. I can subtract off my 10:30. When I do, this is going to become 80 minus 30 is 50 minutes. 16 minus 10 is 6. So the extra time was 6 hours and 15 minutes. I could have just added that on to this time down here. Let's say that my time was supposed to be at 2:45, just because that way we can see if I end up with 9:35. So if I add 2:45, because that would be the time that I originally was going to arrive, I've added 6 hours and 50 minutes onto that. And when I do, this is going to give me a 95 minutes and 8 hours. Well, right now, 95 minutes is more than an hour. So I can take off 60 minutes of that. And if I subtract off 60 minutes, this is going to become 35. And I take those extra 60 minutes and I move them over here. This becomes 9:35. So it's the same time as this time down here. It's the exact same time. So either way you want to do it, you can take the time difference or you could use the same formula. I get the same amount no matter what. Now in this problem, we have missionaries are leaving San Francisco, California, and they're traveling to Beijing, China. They will leave San Francisco at 8:45 a.m. Standard Time and arrive in Beijing at 11:25 a.m. the following day. How long was the flight? So we do need some information here. We need to know what their time zones are in comparison with the UTC. And we also kind of need to know how are they actually traveling. So the fastest way to get from San Francisco to Beijing, China is to actually cross the international date line. If you went the other way, it would take a lot longer. So you can see here that our Pacific Standard Time is -8 and that our CST, and in this case CST stands for China Standard Time, is +8. And what that really means is that these numbers are in reference to the prime meridian, which is 0 on the scale of UTC. And then somewhere over in here, this dotted line here, basically I'm just going to draw a line, but this dotted line that's here, this is kind of the international date line. So if this going this way is -8, that means that from here to here is a 4, because from this line all the way to the prime meridian is 12, and then from this line all the way to the prime meridian is 12. Same thing. If it's 8 to go this way, if this is 8 hours to get to the prime meridian, then that means to get to here is only 4 hours. So basically you're traveling 8 hours in the future. You're not going back 8 hours like we saw in the previous problem. You're going in the future 8 more hours. And so when we do that, we need to figure out how long this flight actually took. So as I was thinking about how I would solve this problem, I actually really like to put everything in the same time zone first and then calculate the difference in those time zones. So I decided, you know what would it be in San Francisco if I were in Beijing? What would my Beijing time be? I want to convert that to San Francisco. So Beijing to San Francisco. And when I do that, I started at 11 hours and 25 minutes. And in this case, because I want to put this time all the way back in this time zone, I thought, you know what, I'll change this over to by 8 hours. So I'm going to subtract that off, and that's going to put me at 3 hours and 25 minutes in the morning. That's what time it would be if I put it in San Francisco time. Now, I also gained a whole day when I traveled over that way. So I'm going to add on to that 24 hours because I gained a day. And I'm just going to kind of put in here like NSF. Even though the location is different, in San Francisco it would be 3:25 in the morning, but I'm on a different day. So I have to add that extra day on. And when I add these things across, this puts me at 27 hours and 25 minutes. Now, I'm not going to change anything yet because even though this is a whole day's worth of time, I added it on purpose. So I'm not going to change anything yet. Well, if I want to see how long it took me to get from San Francisco to Beijing, China, I have to subtract off now the start time. So this is my start time. And everything now is in the start time zone of San Francisco. I've converted it all to what it would be in San Francisco, including that extra travel time. Well, in San Francisco, I started at 8:45 in the morning. Well, at this point, I can subtract that off. Now, 25 is less than 45. So I need to actually take an hour from here. I'm going to convert this to a 6. I'm going to add 60 minutes onto this 25 minutes. And when I do, this becomes an 8. So I have 85 minutes subtracted from 45 minutes gives me 40 minutes. And then I can take 26 hours minus 8 more hours, and this gives me 18 hours. So the flight time, even if there was a layover, there could have been a layover in there, the whole travel time that they spent getting from San Francisco all the way to Beijing, China would have been 18 hours and 40 minutes. Now, it really didn't matter which one I converted. If I wanted to leave it in, if I wanted to not convert this to San Francisco time and I wanted to convert the San Francisco into China time, I could have done that too, and it would have given me the same amount. The only major thing you need to consider is that you need to add in that gain day no matter what, or your calculations won't come out correctly. So I either would have taken off the 8 hours up here, or I would have had to add the 8 hours onto here. Either way, it doesn't matter, but make sure you gain that extra day by adding the 24 hours because you cross the date line. So you need to add that into your calculation or it won't calculate correctly.